Hello, welcome to a Bartholomew English Department video. Is Lord of the Flies. We'll be looking at it as a way of improving your skills for the English language examination. So can you please make sure that you are only a year 10? In year 11 we'll teach you how to use this text for the English literature. This is teaching you, using Lord of the Flies, how to approach the English language exam. So you'll need the question. We've gone for C from chapter 1. Make sure you have that. So here's an example of a question, and it essentially asks you to do three things. So it begins by saying, look in detail at the extract, then how does the writer use language here to describe the incident? And then here come the three things. You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and finally sentence forms. Now we're going to work through each of these three things in turn, giving you some ideas about how you might approach it, and then showing you how you might put these things together and communicate them in an answer. You will need 3 different highlighters to be able to do this, so you might want to pause and get those now. Okay. With your first highlighter, you're going to pick out the first thing they asked for, which is words and phrases. I'm going to read it, and you need to highlight things as I'm going through it. So you might look in this particular passage for words that suggest action or phrases which are to do with violence or panic. Are there any phrases which are particularly dramatic, so you can talk about dramatic language use? So I will read it and then you highlight. They were in the beginnings of a thick forest, plonking with weary feet on a track, when they heard the noises, squeakings, and the hard strike of hoofs on a path. As they pushed forward, the squeaking increased till it became a frenzy. They found a piglet caught in a curtain of creepers, throwing itself at the elastic traces in all the madness of extreme terror. Its voice was thin, needle-sharp and insistent. The 3 boys rushed forward and Jack drew his knife again with a flourish. He raised his arm in the air. There came a pause, a hiatus. The pig continued to scream, and the creepers to jerk, and the blade continued to flash at the end of a bony arm. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormity the downward stroke would be. Then the piglet tore loose from the creepers and scurried into the undergrowth. They were left looking at each other in the place of terror. Jack's face was white under the freckles. He noticed that he still held the knife aloft and brought his arm down, replacing the blade in the sheath. Then they all 3 laughed ashamedly and began to climb back to the track. I was choosing a place, said Jack. I was just waiting for a moment to decide where to stab him. You should stick a pig, said Ralph fiercely. They always talk about sticking a pig. You cut a pig's throat to let the blood out, said Jack. Otherwise, you can't eat the meat. So, hopefully, you've highlighted some things there. The next thing they ask you to look at are language features, so techniques. For example, in this piece, you might look at the use of noises, particularly in the pig. You might look at metaphor. There's some alliteration in there as well. Rather than me read it again, you should pause and just spend a minute trying to highlight 2 or 3 things which are language techniques. So pause and have a go at that. The last thing they ask you for is sentence forms. In this particular piece, I would look for very short sentences used for impact, and also some longer sentences which list things, increase the pace of the action. Again, rather than me read it, if you pause and try and find 2 or 3 places where you can highlight this with your 3rd highlighter colour. You should have the mark scheme. the different skills that they look for on these questions. In lessons, we also have these big laminate mats that talk you through all the different areas you might look at. On the back, they talk to you about how you would receive a bronze, silver or gold award for these. And they also give you some phrases that you can use. So these are things that you can use in lesson. If you ask your teacher, I'm sure we could produce something you could take home. Something else that some students might find easier is this route taking you through all the different things you should ask of a text. So first of all, it asks you about words and phrases. Then it asks you things to do with grammar. Then things to do with sounds. Then things to do with sentence grammar, so how the whole sentence is put together. And finally, any features which are left that you might look at. So one of the things you might do is work your way around this little route with a text, and it will start to train you in the sorts of ways you can take a text apart. A reminder then, in the exam you only have 10 minutes to answer this question. Can you bear in mind this is for the English language exam? We're just using Lord of the Flies to teach you the techniques. Be really detailed, stick to quotations and their effects. Don't give them introductions and conclusions. That's just waffle. You don't have time for it in 10 minutes. It's not an essay. Try to cover each of the 3 bullets, but I wouldn't be too worried about doing them equally. If you can use technical terms, do use them. They do get marks if you can talk about the effect that they have upon the reader. If you're struggling to think about how to begin your piece, you can do a lot worse than just say the writer's use of the word, quote a word, and then say what effect it creates, because that's what the first bullet point asks you to do. So, I'm going to read to you now an example of how you might answer this. It'll come in 3 pages in 3 different sections because each one is one of the bullet points. So, this first bit is what you might say and how you might phrase an answer to do with language in terms of word and phrases. The writer uses dramatic word choices to show the panic of the pig. The word frenzy shows it is blind in its fear, thrashing madly. Indeed, the phrase madness of extreme terror implies that it has lost all control. This could give a sense of the boy's dominance over the pig, but it could also suggest the emotionally charged atmosphere which leads the boys to let the pig escape. The verbs used also suggest action and violence. At first the boys are plonking, which implies they're tired and fed up. When they saw the pig they rushed, showing their determination. The actions of the pig are in verbs like squeaking, throwing, tore loose, suggesting its growing panic. However, when it leaves, it's scurried, which reminds us of its small size as well as its terror. So we're giving quotations, we're saying what they imply, if we can, we're saying more than one thing about a quotation. So that's words and phrases. So next we're going to look at techniques. The writer uses noises, nice simple technique. The writer uses noises to create tension, particularly the squeakings, which increased until they reach a frenzy and scream just before the knife is about to fall. He also uses metaphors such as caught in a curtain of creepers to emphasize how thick and trap-like the setting of the jungle is. The alliteration of the hard C sound also helps emphasize this. The noise of the pig is described as needle sharp, which implies that it is painful to hear, but also suggests the pain of the knife waiting for the pig. So we've picked out metaphors, alliteration, noises, given them a quotation, and then talked about its effect. Finally, we're going to look at how it uses sentences. So, sentence lengths are used by the writer to help emphasize action. When Jack is about to stab, a short sentence is used. He raised his arm in the air. This shows the pause the writer mentions, suggesting that an important action is about to take place. However, after this pause, a longer, list-like sentence suggests the jumble of noise and movements. Scream and jerk and flash. This confusion is perhaps what gives the pig enough time to escape. Notice we don't bother quoting the long sentence, we just put the key words and we put an ellipsis, which are those 3 dots, to show we've missed some words out. You don't have time to be copying out chunks of the text. So that's it, an example of how you might approach one of those questions, an example of how you might write it. I hope you found that useful.